Evening on the show tonight, Anthony Albanese admits he's responsible for the housing crunch as the RBA warns families might lose their homes. Jacinta Price will be here to discuss. And I can exclusively reveal a prominent leader who's led the fight against anti-Semitism in universities was not called to appear at the Royal Commission. I'll have those details in a moment. Also discuss with Ben English. And an American billionaire reveals he and his wife suffered 7 miscarriages after Anthony Fauci's bombshell texts show the disgraced doctor knew about the risks of the COVID vaccine for pregnant women, but said nothing. More on that in a moment. But first, a stark warning from the RBA today. Australians may be waiting another 2 years for a rate cut as it kept the cash rate on hold at 4.35%. And Governor Michelle Bullock made one thing clear. Every member of the Reserve Bank board remains concerned about inflation. And the bank is leaving the door open to a future rate rise. With little confidence, inflation will return to target anytime soon. And in fact, she warned rates may still rise.
I think the message today is that in waiting, the board isn't ruling out that there might be a need for further interest rate rises. There was a diversity of views about how strongly people felt that they were worried about inflation, but everyone was at least a little bit worried about what those inflationary risks might be and what they might imply.
And Bullock also delivered a sobering assessment of the housing downturn. And worryingly, she revealed the RBA had modelled an even steeper fall in property prices than the 15% forecast by ANZ just this week. And her message was that some families could face serious financial distress, but the banking system will remain secure.
I think we've done some scenarios. If property prices fell by 20%, still only about 5% of households would be in negative equity. And then you add to that negative equity only matters if you are a distressed seller and you need to get rid of the property because you lose your job or for family breakdowns or things like that. Awful circumstances, which are compounded by the fact that you'd have to sell your house. But it doesn't pose a risk to the financial institutions because they are very well capitalised.
That is an increasingly grim reality that's facing Australian families. And yet it's one the Prime Minister flatly refuses to acknowledge. It's his government's drastic tax changes that are fueling this housing crunch. And instead of apologising for the fact that some buyers will be forced to sell their homes, he's actually taking credit for it. Now, for weeks, Albanese's ministers have ducked and weaved around the question of whether they actually wanted house prices to collapse. Well, finally today, in question time, he couldn't escape the question, and the Prime Minister took responsibility for the housing crunch. In Parliament, he admitted that he wanted house prices to fall.
Labor's toxic taxes have tanked the housing market. ANZ Bank today reports Sydney house prices could fall by almost 15%, the worst crash in more than 4 decades. Will the Prime Minister finally admit Labor's broken promises on capital gains tax and negative gearing have made millions of Australian homeowners worse off?
We had measures that were aimed at addressing the challenges that are facing young Australians when it comes to owning a house. What we have had is creating a change in the way that the tax system operates in order to give first home buyers a fair crack.
Well, for most households, their family home is their biggest asset, and no one's happy to see its value tumble. And as Michelle Bullock indicated, many young buyers are already in or are going to go into negative equity because of disastrous government policies. Yet Albanese ignores the fact that his tax changes haven't just caused prices to plummet, they've also destroyed confidence in the property market. And this loss of confidence has frozen activity, with buyers and sellers all but retreating from the market. And clearance rates are plummeting. The reality is Albanese would be in dire straits politically if it weren't for the coalition's own performance. The coalition's sub 20% primary vote is masking the depth of the Albanese government's poor performance and political troubles. Now, you think when Julia Gillard languished at comparable levels, Labor eventually turned back to Kevin Rudd. Albanese is safe right now only because the Liberals are doing so poorly. For now, his greatest political protection is the weakness of his opponents. Now, the private text messages of presidential advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci have explosively revealed that as early as January 2021, he was aware of the risks associated with vaccinating pregnant women with the COVID jab. Yet, he didn't tell the public. This is yet another major deception by Anthony Fauci. Now, to catch you up on this, his government phone was last week handed to US Senators Rand Paul and Ron Johnson. And over the past few days, they've been trawling through the 34,000 text messages on his government phone and the 522 voice messages. And so far, the texts show Fauci discussing the pros and cons of the COVID vaccine for pregnant women in their early stages. He spoke about misperceptions and anxieties in one text message, but then he wrote this. I asked around a bit more and another issue came up that you need to be aware of. Since many people have significant psychoteens, storm and fever after the second dose, this theoretically could be associated with miscarriage in the first trimester. Now, he sent that text message on January 25th, 2021. Certainly a worrying text message. And the then head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Rochelle Walensky, replied. She said to Fauci, definitely a good point, especially after dose 2. Well, the then Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he was in this text message exchange, the three of them, and he chimed in with, this is really helpful, thanks. I've been hearing the concern about the mRNA causing mutations in the developing fetus as well. Well, this is all very well and good, but pregnant women were not told about these potential concerns. And in another message, Vivek Murthy said to Fauci that he was surprised to see the World Health Organization advise women who were pregnant not to get the Moderna vaccine. And he wrote this. That's a strong statement to make and potentially quite damaging to public confidence among pregnant women. Now, these text messages have just emerged today. Senator Ron Johnson, one of those analysing the phone, is furious about them.
What you have to connect this to is what they were saying publicly that was contrary to that, but also what they were publishing. So I think this is the tip of the iceberg.
All right, so let's have a look at what Anthony Fauci was saying publicly. You've just seen what he was saying privately. Well, publicly, Fauci said that COVID could cause serious illness during pregnancy and that no safety issues had emerged among more than 10,000 pregnant women who'd received the vaccine. Have a look at this.
There have been now over 10,000 pregnant women who have said and have been in the trials.
Okay.
The FDA, as part of the typical follow-up you have following the initial issuing of an EUA, have found thus far, and we got to be careful, but thus far, no red flags about that, about pregnant women.
No red flags. I mean, those comments were on February the 3rd, 2021, just 1 week after their private text messages about the potential miscarriage risks of the vaccine. And then Fauci's language was stronger still a week later.
I want to point out that since the EUA and under the EUA, approximately 20,000 pregnant women have been vaccinated with no red flags, as we say, and this is being monitored by the CDC and the FDA.
And then a few months after that, in April 2021, the CDC explicitly recommended that pregnant women take the COVID vaccine. Well, NIH Director the current NIH director under Trump, says that Fauci owed the public transparency and he should have been upfront.
And I share your concern. I think that when you have a new product like the COVID vaccine was back then, you should be careful with pregnant women. And it's shocking to me that that he was sharing private thoughts, and that when he was out on public, and he was out in public a lot, he didn't share those private thoughts with the American public.
Now, you've got to remember, in early 2021, this was still a relatively unknown area. And even now, the health advice remains mixed on whether vaccinated women should receive further doses during pregnancy. And really, it's ultimately up to the patient and their doctor to decide. But Fauci's messages today already caused a firestorm. And in response, billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman revealed something deeply personal. He said, "Neri and I had 7 miscarriages trying to have a second child during COVID, and then the time ran out." WTF was he thinking? 7 miscarriages. And it's pretty clear now, from the origins of COVID-19 to health advice, Fauci's spin is unraveling fast. And with Rand Paul and Ron Johnson on his heels, he could even face a state prosecution. But in the court of public opinion, and certainly in my opinion, he's already been found guilty. I'm going to come back to that topic a bit later. But now we've been criticising the Royal Commission for its refusal to call prominent Jewish Australians, including Josh Frydenberg. I can now exclusively reveal that Western Sydney University Chancellor Jennifer Westacott put in a submission to the Royal Commission, but was also not called. Now, this is extraordinary, because Westacott has been the singular figure in the tertiary education sector taking leadership on anti-Semitism. And she made it very clear that her university would not accept hate speech. She had university leaders undertake anti-Semitism and cultural awareness training. She created an initiative to help institutions combat extremism. She was the leading figure taking action. She has some of the answers, and yet she wasn't called. She has first-hand experience with the solutions. Jennifer Westacott, and I can confirm she'll be on this program to talk about this tomorrow night. Now, my colleague and friend Chris Kenny also revealed earlier in his show today that former ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma, had also wanted to give evidence, but was also not called to testify. And as I mentioned last night, I'm personally in the same situation. Well, Liberal Senator James Paterson also made the crucial point when he was on this program yesterday evening that Albanese's ministers, well, they should be called to account for their actions amid the explosion in hatred.
We need the Prime Minister to appear before the Royal Commission. We need the Home Affairs Minister to appear before the Royal Commission. We need the Attorney General and the Foreign Minister to appear before the Royal Commission. They should be cross-examined about what they did and what they didn't do to combat anti-Semitism in the lead up to the horrific terrorist atrocity at Bondi. And if that doesn't happen, well, then I think it'll be very difficult to take this Royal Commission seriously. And I would urge the Commissioner to reflect, not just on what the people who appointed her will think of the work that she does, but what history will judge of this Royal Commission. History will be watching, history will judge. God forbid if there are further atrocities targeting the Jewish community in the future of our country. I wouldn't want to lead a Royal Commission process that wasn't the most thorough, robust, searching examination of that.
He is spot on. No one could say it better. And joining me now to discuss is Daily Telegraph editor Ben English. Ben, thank you for being here. Now, there's speculation in the Jewish community that political motivation can be the only possible explanation behind the Commission's refusal to hear evidence from Josh Frydenberg, Dave Sharma, Jennifer Westacott and more.
Yeah, well, and you. Absolutely. And how could they be blamed for coming to any other conclusion? When you talk about Josh Frydenberg, he's the highest elected official as a Jew, highest elected to Parliament as the Treasurer. You talk about Dave Sharma, the ambassador to Israel. You talk about Jennifer Westacott. Her submission to the Royal Commission was outstanding. It was comprehensive, it was succinct, and she displayed deep understanding of the issue at hand. and yourself, you've been a constant strident campaigner for Jewish affairs, but also a news-breaking reporter who's been subjected to vile attacks.
Thank you.
These four people, including yourself, would be surely at the top of the list of the people who should have been brought before the Royal Commission to give them insights to what, let's face it, the whole purpose of the Royal Commission is to understand why this attack took place, why Islamic extremists were able to kill 15 Jewish people on Australian soil at Bondi Beach.
Yeah, and the lead up to that, of which the government's actions is a crucial part. I mean, they, you know, as James Patterson put it, what they did or didn't do as this crisis was exploding, I mean, that needs to be examined as well.
Well, I'm quite frankly, I'm shocked that is not being planned, that ministers are not being brought to bear for this.
Yeah, I'm shocked as well. Well, I'm not shocked, but, you know, I think it is shocking they're not being called. Ben, I want to turn to your to one of the... You've got two great stories in the Daily Telegraph tomorrow. Let's first talk about this one about how students are being warned off Pauline Hanson.
Yeah, so obviously this is making a lot of the people in the left. Pauline Hanson's rise is making a lot of people in the left wet their beds, and particularly they're trying to do whatever they can, and a lot of it's stupid, including this one. So some of the more radical elements of Sydney have now put together an action plan and a march that they want students to take part in. They're handing out pamphlets encouraging them to take time off school and to stay in their uniforms to march against Pauline. And they're calling it the High School Anti-Capitalist Toolkit. And basically it's been handing it out outside train stations as kids are making their commute to high school. So it's a disgrace, but it's not surprising.
I hate when the activists target school kids. It's just leave the children alone, let them get an education.
Well, I think Pauline's response is fantastic. She just said, look, my advice to kids is to go to school. You'll learn a lot more and you'll come out and realise that I'm on your side. Yeah,
good response. Now, you've got another amazing paper. This is a story. This is on your front page tomorrow. We can bring it up and have a look at it. Tell us about this.
OK, so there's been 300 petrol stations, the metro petrol stations that have been raided around Australia. Essentially the suspicion amongst police, and this is a very detailed and comprehensive investigation that's been going for many months, is that this is part of an organised crime syndicate that has been operating potentially through these service stations. It's going to have implications for commuters because these were the cheapest petrol stations and they dragged down the major retailers. But I mean, look, let's face it. I mean, this is the result of government policy. They've jacked up the excise to such an extent that people are just looking for cheaper smoke, so they've created a perfect landscape for organised crime to step in.
Premier Chris Minns has been on the other side of the argument on this. He's saying this is creating a real crime problem. Absolutely,
and he's right. You know, we're in lockstep with him. We're basically saying, look, the excise level is basically handing organised crime an opportunity on a platter, and they're just coming to collect the bounty.
There's this story that everyone's been speaking about today. The Strathfield Council in Sydney is saying they're putting up a motion to council to basically say all shopfront signs should be in English. Now, this is controversial, but should it be, Ben?
I don't even know why it is. I mean, why in 2026 do we have a situation where there's shops that don't have English? I mean, if we're talking about, we're in a moment in history now where social cohesion is recognised as one of the biggest challenges. Well, wouldn't one of the easiest ways to bring about better cohesion is to encourage one common language? So by all means, have another language on your shop sign, but it should be a fundamental requirement that every shop has English signs.
Have you filled out your census already, Ben?
No.
You can do it.
Yes, I'm going to do it when I get home, I promise.
I was thinking about not doing it, and then I looked up the fine, and they will fine you every single day. They will knock on your door until you do it. So I did it yesterday. All right. Well, have a good night going home and doing that.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Well, the Prime Minister has finally broken his silence on the melon saga, denying his offensive and crude remarks have had any impact on Australia's relationship with Japan.
I reject the assertion in the question. Australia and Japan have never been closer or more strategically aligned. And my government has taken our special strategic partnership to new heights.
But he's still refusing to apologise, and his Minister for Women is out there denying there's any issue.
The comments and the remarks from the Prime Minister have been misinterpreted. The Prime Minister is very clear that he did not mean for those comments to be interpreted in the way they have by some media outlets and by our political opponents. I know this Prime Minister. I work with him every day. I know how he relates to women. He has enormous respect for women.
And Shadow Minister for Small Business, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, joins me now. Jacinta, great to see you again. Well, what did you think about the Minister for Women defending Albanese on this?
Well, you just can't believe this government, and you can't believe the Minister for Women when she suggests that he has great respect. I mean, this is following the comments that he made about Kylie Minogue as well. So the fact that she can just brush those off is utterly disgraceful. But this is Labor in action. First they lie and then they gaslight, and they're trying to make Australians rethink, well, perhaps I have viewed this in the wrong way. But Australians, you're right. To the everyday person, we can see clearly, we can see through the nonsense, and we can see that this behaviour was utterly disgraceful from a Prime Minister. And we, of course, have heard from the former Japanese ambassador to Australia, and he should apologise to the Prime Minister, because if this was said by anyone else, by a coalition male, then Labor would be absolutely condemning them, jumping up and down, seeking for them to resign. And this has brought great shame on our country. I mean, that's the other element of this, right? The cultural shame that this has caused. They don't even consider that in Japanese culture, to say something like this, I imagine, would be very shameful, very disgraceful. That this government doesn't even consider that. I mean, Penny Wong stood in the Senate saying the same things, brushing it off. I'd like to know what he actually meant by those comments then, if it's not the way we have all taken it to mean two melons.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's pretty clear what he did mean, and it is very disrespectful at the very least to the Japanese Prime Minister Tsunai Takaichi. But Jacinta, I also think we should be seeing the correspondence. We know there was a diplomatic cable sent from Japan to Australia. Well, what did Albanese reply to that? Was there an apology contained in that? Because he had to have accounted for it somehow. I want to move on to his comments in question time today, though, because he admitted that their tax policies were lowering the house prices. He spun this by saying it was a good thing for first home buyers. So I'm interested in your view, Jacinta. Do you think house prices falling are good for young buyers?
Well, this government has delivered the trifecta of failure in this particular area, in that they've delivered fewer homes, higher rent, and also smashed confidence in the market. But this is the problem, right? You spoke about it earlier, the fact that there are those first home buyers now who have gone into negative equity in terms of their homes. But the problem is Anthony Albanese is trying to do a magic trick, saying to the Australian people, oh, look over here, this is this wonderful thing that we're doing. But as we've heard from the RBA, this isn't actually good, because it means that inflation is high. And that's the thing that's going on down here that we're not looking at, is the fact that inflation remains high as a result of this, which means everything else, the cost of living remains high. Everything else is continuing to be pushed up, and there's no relief from that. And as we've seen also that, there's been a rates hike, 15 of them under this government, and there's no sign of that lowering. I mean, they're holding the cash rate at the moment, as we've seen, but nothing is changing under this particular government, and things are getting worse, and rightly so. confidence in the market is also being smashed. I mean, this is why we've got our plan, the coalition has got our plan, and we do want to bring down, we want to make sure that homes are affordable, but also that more are available. And the way you do that is by slashing red tape, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to slash the National Construction Code from 2,500 pages to 250, which brings down the cost of building a home by $70,000. And we want to make sure Australians and young people get the opportunity to buy their homes, but that they don't lose value in the home they've purchased, so they can continue to have that not just as a home, but as an asset and something for their future as well.
Yeah. Many have criticised the government for pulling the ladder up for these young buyers. I'm interested in your view on this report today by the Australian Institute for Marine Science. It shows that the Great Barrier Reef is thriving. It says that the reef has bounced back from the mass bleaching over the past year. They say coral cover is at near record levels from Cape York to Bundaberg in Queensland. In fact, they say it's the highest it's been in 35 years. I mean, Jacinta, this report, if it's true, seems to fly in the face of climate doomsayers who have been saying for a long time that the Great Barrier Reef is on the verge of death.
Oh, surprise, surprise. Anyone with any common sense in their mind will understand that, of course, this is the case. And of course, the doomsayers, it's not just Labor that gaslight people. It's also the green grifters that do the same. And we've experienced this over and over again. We've seen the weaponisation of children to fight adult fights. They're politicising these particular issues because they have their own agenda. And, it's with this, it's with the climate issue as well. We see it in places like the Northern Territory when these green grifters have their own agenda and they use and abuse traditional owners for their causes. It is about following the science. And as we can see, the Great Barrier Reef is making a recovery, and that is wonderful. And but science should always be questioned and tested over and over again, and so should these environmental activists with their underlying agendas.
Yeah, indeed. Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, thank you so much for joining us live from Canberra on a busy sitting week. Appreciate your time. Well, South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas today announced a $3 million Royal Commission into artificial intelligence without consulting his federal counterparts. Malinauskas said he had a duty to set up guardrails for AI.
I genuinely believe we are at a really important fork in the road where we can choose to allow this industry to come to our country and evolve in a way that is unregulated and unchecked, and we will be subject to the determinations it makes rather than the other way around. Or we can choose to set the agenda.
And with me now is UNSW AI Institute Chief Professor Toby Walsh. Toby, great to see you. Look, I thought this was a really unusual move. I mean, the whole world is dealing with AI, questioning whether there are limitations. The technology seems to have sped right past any attempt at guardrails. And then you have the Premier of, a state on the other side of the world trying to set up guardrails. What do you think?
Well, the Premier's right. AI is going to be very transformative and we need to think about regulating it and so on. But it's going to happen to the whole of Australia, the whole of the world. So I'm not sure why South Australia itself needs to be following its own path.
In terms of the sort of regulation that we should be looking at, and I remember, a decade ago, Elon Musk was concerned about the impact that AI could have on mankind. Now, of course, he's not expressing any concerns of the sort. So, are there protections in place, or is everyone just not worrying about the risks?
I don't think we're worrying enough about the risks it's going to have on people's employment, the risk it's going to have on young people. Did we not learn the lessons from social media? There have been discussions about having things like a digital duty of care. I think we should do that, and we should apply that to things like artificial intelligence. We've age-gated social media. Maybe we should age-gate AI companions and AI therapists so that young people are protected from the harms of these technologies.
I mean, Malinowska spoke about how it would impact on children learning at school today, but I mean, the changes are just far beyond that. Also enormous benefits too, right? I mean, in surgery, in healthcare, in so many important facets of life.
Yeah, I mean that's what I hope the Royal Commission, if it's is going to look at, is going to look at the opportunities as well as the risks and the regulation that's needed. The newest drugs are being discovered by artificial intelligence. Latest antibiotic discovered not by human doctors but by artificial intelligence. So there's fantastic opportunity, and it's a question of, is Australia going to seize the benefits? Are we seeing the government make those sorts of investments? We had the Prime Minister make a landmark speech a couple of weeks ago, but we've yet to see much action.
All right, Toby, thank you for that quick hit. Appreciate your time. Coming up, why Democrats are worried communist candidates are taking over their party, and they should be worried. Our Washington correspondent, John O'Kersley, will join me a little later. Plus, a major expose has aired the dirty laundry of tech billionaires Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar. The authors of this explosive book will be here after the break. Welcome back. Well, claims about warring wives, a hacking scare and allegations of a toxic work culture behind the scenes at Atlassian have all been exposed in an incredible new book. The book also examines the breakdown in the relationship between Mike Cannon-Brookes and his co-founder, Scott Farquhar. Now, among the many explosive claims is that Mike accused Scott of behaving like a bully in their year of not speaking to each other. Now, this is the book, Tech Bros. We'll show it to you now. Tech Bros, it's been making front page news. And with me now to discuss are the authors, finest business journalists in the country, John Stensold and Perry Williams. Great to see you both. Now, this has been making the front page of the Oz for so many days now because you've just got incredible revelations. I want to start with the 3 acts of Atlassian, John, and how this all unravelled and went so wrong for the company.
Well, firstly, it goes really right. They make so much money in that first 10 years or so. These guys are an amazing success story. They become billionaires out of university, right? It's incredible. Then they float on the NASDAQ. So all this money starts coming in, like real money. They become billionaires with money coming in so many forms. And the cracks start to show. They move in next door to each other. There's issues over the fence we'll probably go into. Yeah. And then like the final act is really when things really start to fall apart. And it culminates in Scott Farquhar leaving the company in 2024 after a whole bunch of issues behind the scenes, which we've written about.
Yeah. And Perry, the culture as well at the company, it was known as one of the best places in the world, really, to work. And then you've exposed how this became a really toxic culture.
Yeah, that's right, Sharri. Yeah, it was really quite industry leading. They had this very sort of open, company, no BS mantra. You could discuss problems. There were these very active Slack messaging channels where people vented. The co-founders, Farquhar and Cannon-Brookes were right behind it. And as the company got larger and sort of as the culture got sort of put under a little bit more pressure, things started to splinter a little. So, yeah, obviously we've got plenty of revelations about that in the book it proved quite a handful for them both.
Just quickly mention, these are all allegations, of course. Now, you just mentioned the Slack messages. Now, this was one of the explosive parts in your book, that there were messages and it showed that there was this rift and bullying allegations made by Mike Cannon-Brookes' EA, executive assistant, against his wife. John, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible scenario, Sharri, where Mike's EA puts in basically lodges a bullying application or bullying allegation against Mike's wife, and Mike doesn't tell his wife about it. So there's all these sort of interesting scenarios swirling underneath the business that they're running. It feels that the private office that they have is really, chaotic. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. There's all sorts of bullying allegations going everywhere, but Mike doesn't tell his wife about this one. Yeah. Now, it's important to say that, we put a whole bunch of questions to these people. Yeah. A whole raft of questions about these secret reports that we found out about them. They actually, it actually ended up with another law firm looking into these allegations. We think it's because of the questions that we asked. They never answered the questions to us. They really sort of almost like as a small ball strategy of not trying to deal with this, except for a couple of allegations that we covered in the newspaper about some of these bullying and harassment allegations that we uncovered.
Yeah, it's incredible you wrote this book without speaking to them, but you got cooperation from clearly so many people. You got internal company Slack messages, just fascinating. Perry, I also want to ask, how distracted did Mike become with his climate change obsession, and did that have an impact on the business?
Yeah, look, I think it's sort of undeniable that, Mike, who went off on a lot of escapades, Climate Crusader, AGL Energy, one of the most famous ones, Sun Cable that John and I have written about. This is the big solar export project to Singapore that's, still hasn't got off the ground. He had to come out and start saying, yes, I'm still focused on my day job, and I'm not getting distracted. I think the fact that he had to say that was a worrying sign. And from the sources we spoke to, Scott Farquhar was certainly getting frustrated that Mike's time wasn't being focused solely on Atlassian.
And so this played into the relationship breakdown, John, but it would have involved other elements as well, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. So we've uncovered, as you said at the start, this year of not talking, and they at one stage moved in next to each other in Point Piper. They'd pay out a combined $171 million to buy these two mansions together. And
they knocked down the fence so that kids could play.
Exactly. Today they sit vacant, which is a bit of a metaphor, right? I mean, it's, sort of like there's it's dilapidated. So there's a year where they don't talk. They literally have to fly to California to have a counselling session, one-on-one with a counsellor, to sort of try and thrash out their differences and try to get back on track, so to speak. They get back on track for a while, but then the houses issue crops up. There's other issues that permeate along the way as well. COVID interferes with what they're doing. They all start to work from home, so they never see each other. So there's all these issues bubbling along. And then, in 2024, Scott leaves. So it's the breakdown of one of the great business partnerships in Australian history, but it's also a cautionary tale of what happens when there's too much money and a lot of power and a lot of egos that sort of all swirl around to have these issues that we found.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think they made, and correct me if I'm wrong, Perry, but around $5 billion each. I mean, what did they spend all their money on?
Oh, look, it's hard to go past the houses to start with. Yeah. Mike in particular, I think John will know the number, $450 million, I think, on housing around Sydney. You name it, some of the, great trophy properties around. Scott, wasn't too far behind. I think probably close to $300 million spent on housing. Look, they have been quite savvy investors as well. They've had some misses, but they've had plenty of hits. One of the interesting things, John has covered is that Scott's one of the biggest private airport investors in Australia. Mike's obviously the biggest shareholder in AGL Energy. So, they've splashed a lot of cash, and there's plenty more that they could still spend if they wanted to. Yeah.
So Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brookes, their partnership didn't make it. How did yours go writing the book?
Oh, look, we're still here talking next to each other, Sharri. So I think we've gone all right.
Not just for the cameras.
It's not just for the cameras like they are. I think we're still brothers, so to speak.
Congratulations on the book, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sharri.
On launch day, no less.
Thanks, Sharri.
All right, after the break, how Trump evaded an Iranian assassination threat using a catering truck and a decoy. And former Treasury Assistant Secretary will explain what the RBA's inflation data really means shortly. Well, there's been incredible reporting by the Washington Post, which has revealed that President Donald Trump snuck off Air Force One in a catering truck last month in Turkey to secretly board another military flight. And this was in response to a threat from Iran. And you can see this on your screen. The decoy was so elaborate that even journalists and some White House staff believe that they were still on the same plane as the president when they left the NATO summit. And joining me now to discuss, our Washington correspondent, Jonathan Kersley, who happens to be in Sydney. The thrill of having you visit.
Sharri, delightful to be here at News24 HQ and delightful to be sitting here with you.
So this is quite incredible. But what was the threat from Iran? What do we know about it?
Well, there'd been a lot of cloak and dagger moves around this originally, because you remember the Qatari gifted Air Force One, President Trump flew to Turkey. He had announced he was taking back to a British base on the way home. And it raised questions immediately because it seemed an unusual move. Why would the president take an empty plane but also fly on old Air Force One to go to the military base? Now, we then knew within 24, 48 hours that this was all largely down to a security threat from Iran. There was some sort of threat against his life that meant they had to make the switch. But this extraordinary reporting in the Washington Post now that is indicating that he actually was never on that plane to begin with. And you can see in this footage here that is being shown now, the level of work that went to get him on the plane in front of the television cameras, then out the back onto a catering truck, then onto another aircraft in behind it. And you can see in the footage a figure that looks like President Trump making his way up the stairs of that plane. The situation they've got now is obviously the Secret Service was there to protect the life of the president, and that's what they've done. The questions that will be raised now is, well, the press were left unaware, the White House staff seemingly left unaware in this incredibly elaborate plot to make the president safe. That entire time, that packed old Air Force One plane was flying as a decoy, flew as a decoy the whole time to the United Kingdom, landed second. So there will be some questions raised now, but ultimately, what's the job of
the safety of those who are still on the decoy plane?
Yeah, I think those are the questions that's going to be raised now is, you know, why weren't these people informed? Were their lives being put in danger? Ultimately, the job of the Secret Service is what? To protect the President of the United States of America. And we have seen them coordinate that move so many times before. Butler, Pennsylvania, surrounded him after the assassination attempt. The shooting at the press club, at the Correspondents Association dinner. I was inside that. That was extraordinary. But the elaborate moves you're seeing here in this plot is just shows you the level of work they can put in to try and keep him safe. And clearly they thought they needed to do this.
And we've heard that Israel tipped the US off about this potential Iran threat as well. All right, I want to get to these bombshell Anthony Fauci text messages. I spoke about this earlier in the show where he raised concerns about potential risks associated with miscarriage from the COVID vaccine for pregnant women. Wasn't conclusive. They were just discussing it. But then, Jonathan, just a week later, he went out publicly and assured pregnant women that the COVID vaccines were very safe. So yet again, a case where he was saying something different publicly to his private discussions.
Sharri, you and I were talking about this last week. When they got their hands on his phone, and this is this COVID-era phone that they were able to get the data from, this Republican-led committee, that there was always going to be something. And now we are starting to see what they're looking for. And what they're looking for is exactly what has been reported here now. Contradictions from what he'd said at the time to what he was saying privately. Was there a difference in the way that he was operating? Because it's very clear that they are trying to now build a strong case against him that he should be prosecuted. And President Trump made that argument largely in the Oval Office last week when we heard him say within hours of the vote inside that Senate committee hearing to refer him off to the DOJ, that this is something the DOJ should be looking at, that they went and prosecuted others. They went and prosecuted Trump allies. So why shouldn't they look at somebody like Anthony Fauci?
At a serious case like this. I mean, 34,000 text messages. They've only released like 5 or 6 text messages.
This is the first tranche. This is the first tranche.
It's not even a tranche. It's just like a little trickle. There are going to be revelation after revelation after revelation. Can you imagine what's in his phone?
Well, I think there's going to be, there will probably be some very interesting insights coming forward. The interesting thing moving forward now is how does Anthony Fauci respond to this? Somebody who is heralded as an international hero during the COVID response is now having his entire integrity put to the sword to be questioned in this way. He hasn't experienced something like that in his entire professional career. And right now he's going through exactly what he's probably feared since November of 2024 was going to come.
Or earlier when we started doing the reporting, focusing on him perhaps. I want to have a look at the midterm primary campaigns in the US, how they're going, especially in Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, this is getting really interesting with some of these candidates.
We're getting down to the nitty-gritty now. We are getting ever and ever closer to November. And once again, we are seeing, particularly when it comes to areas like Minnesota in particular, a Senate primary race for the Democrats that is going to look at what is happening with the split, what's happening with the centrists against the populists, against the progressives. once again, we have candidates from either side standing up. We saw this last week.
With Michigan.
With Michigan, but we saw it in other parts of the country too. Now, there was obviously the win for Abdul El Sayed as the progressive in Michigan. There were wins for centrists in other parts of the country. It's not giving a clear picture yet on just how divided this party is, not just heading into November, but heading in towards 2028 as well. Then you've got somebody like Francesca Hong running for governor in Wisconsin, wanting to be in that race come November. And she's having her integrity questioned. She's been asked this week about comments she made about Thanksgiving and whether or not that should be a widely accepted public holiday in America. Of course it is. Many people celebrate that time with family and have done for years. But look, tomorrow it is crucial. There's a number of primaries going on across the state, but across the country. But again, it's just another piece of the jigsaw puzzle as we get towards November. A race that will decide President Trump's final 2 years in office, how that could pan out with the power on the Hill and the power of the governors, but could also set in stone which way the Democrats are going to go for 2028.
Yeah, the future of the party. And look, let's hope it returns to the traditional Democrat base rather than this communist, terror sympathiser, socialist way that many of the candidates we're seeing now seem to be.
Generally win politics sitting in the centre.
Yeah. All right, Jonathan, thank you so much.
With Sharri.
I don't know if that's true anymore with the rise of these candidates. It's a conversation for another day. All right, coming up, Victoria shelves its working from home laws, and a long-time Treasury insider asks if the RBA has inflation under control. That's next. Let's turn to the economy after the RBA decision to keep rates on hold today, and let's bring in former Treasury Assistant Secretary David Pearl. David, one of the main takeouts from today is that inflation is still high, too high.
Good to be with you, Sharri, and your viewers. That's true. Inflation has been too high in this country for more than half a decade now, when you think about it. And that is an indictment on our Reserve Bank and its board.
I mean, clearly every board member is worried about inflation. Michelle Bullock said that. She also hinted that rates may need to rise again. Do you think this should happen?
Well, it was really interesting reading the board statement today and watching Michelle's press conference, because the board's inflation strategy appears to be let's hope for the best in the face of acknowledged risks, and that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. So what Michelle was saying was that given that the board had raised the rate 3 times this year, which is just undoing the damage they did last year, by the way, that hopefully, fingers crossed, will be enough to bring aggregate demand back in line with aggregate supply. But what we're seeing in the economy now doesn't inspire much confidence. We have households spending quite strongly despite what we've seen with oil prices, and that's of course been cushioned by the excise cuts, which have recently been removed. We've got an investment boom in AI data centres and other construction. We've got a very strong labour market. So it's not clear that the existing interest rate setting is restrictive enough. And I don't think Michelle or the board fully believe that either.
So you think rates should have gone up today?
I think it would have been wise, just because the 3 prior rate increases, now I understand that they will have a lagged effect, but I don't see much evidence that households and businesses are cutting spending and investment. And we also have businesses facing higher labour and other costs, which are increasingly passing those on. So the way to think about it, Sharri, is not some perfect interest rate decision. That's impossible. Central banks, economists don't have a good idea of how economies unfold. You should ask yourself, what is the worst error to make? And the worst error for Michelle Bullock and her board, given that they dropped the ball egregiously on inflation last year, would be to do the same thing this year. So if they raise rates a little bit too high and that hurts the economy too much, they can unwind that. If they continue to hope for the best and show a bit of complacency, we'll see inflation emerge again this year, and that would kill the bank's credibility, and it would hurt us all because interest rates would have to be much higher.
Yeah. And I mean, their first wrong call in recent times, at least, was when they had a cut during the election campaign, and that was clearly a bit of a political decision. All right. David Pearl, thank you very much for your insights, as always. Appreciate your time. I'll have to get to the Victorian working from home laws on tomorrow night's show. The Premier today did push them back. Well, that's got to be at least one thing that's good for business and productivity. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Jennifer Westacott on the show right now. Paul Murray.